But nobody wanted to speak on the true disposition of the world, and no one wanted to hear it. The whites came to this land for a fresh start and to escape the tyranny of their masters, just as the free man had fled theirs. But the ideals they held up for themselves, they denied others. Cora had heard Michael recite the Declaration of Independence back on the Randell plantation many times, his voice drifting through the village like an angry phantom. She didn't understand the words, most of them at any rate, but created equal was not lost on her. The white men who wrote it didn't understand it either, if all men did not truly mean all men. Not if they snatched away what belonged to other people, whether it was something you could hold in your hand, like dirt, or something you could not, like freedom. Colson Whitehead, The Underground Railroad. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Wellhouse Exorcism. This is your ghost of a host with the most, Shanna.
It's Buckwell PJ.
Hello, darling.
Hello.
Welcome to the dark underbelly of our house.
As always.
This week for episode 94 and for next week's episode 95, we will be discussing The Haunting of the House of Many Stairs.
Yes.
Which is just here in Pennsdale, Pennsylvania. But to do that, we have to do justice to the entirety of the house, its story, and its legacy.
Yeah, so not much ghost talk this episode.
Nope. We got to give you the history. Kind of like Gettysburg. We gotta bring it to you. You know? We got to build it up.
Yeah.
So we need to use this episode to give you a background on the Underground Railroad, but we know a lot about that from school. We're going to discuss the realism of it, but especially our area's connection to it, because especially Pennsdale, huge area for the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
We also, for our next episode, will have one of our longtime listeners on.
I know, I can't wait.
Alicia will be here. She was a part of the actual live interview and tour of the House of Many Stairs. It was absolutely wonderful. So I know that the Knights are listening, I hope, at this point. Thank you for your wonderful tour. Really appreciate it.
It was absolutely incredible. And they're the two of the nicest people ever.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just a beautiful house. And I love what you guys are doing with it, how you're keeping the history alive, and how you took my research as seriously as you take your own. I really appreciated that. Because it was kind of nice to have her turn on her phone and record my discussion about the history,
right.
After I had recorded for so long her discussion about the house.
Yeah.
So it was nice to kind of bring our minds together. So just awesome. Hats off to you guys and what you're doing in that house. And on our next episode, we will actually have a surprise, something that the House of Many Stairs has not actually presented to its audience yet. So we have a little surprise. They just kind of uncovered some new history.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So that's really exciting. But for tonight, I would like to...
There are a couple, little tidbits in there that are exclusive to us.
Yes. Well, there's one that's confirmed, which I cannot wait to share. The other one is a high probability.
Yeah.
And we all think the same thing.
Yeah.
I feel bad saying that on this episode, and no one knows what we're talking about.
But they're going to have to tune in next week.
That's right, episode 95. But to do justice to that, I want to really get into the Underground Railroad and the background. So my references are all over the place.
Okay.
Because as PJ remembers, when we were on vacation, researching like mad. I've been researching since mid-July when we kind of locked this in. It was going to happen. I brought a 3-ring binder. Here's my paper for it. It's color coded to the point where even my pens match my Post-it notes.
The ink on the pen matches the color of the Post-it. So depending on the topic, it's a different color.
Yep. It's in depth, and I have all the pages enumerated. It is beyond my wildest research, even for when we did our crossover with Full Send Rejects, even more than that. It was crazy. So I really enjoyed it, but I've been working on it for the past month. So my references, I probably have more that I'll have on next episode.
Maybe list the top couple, and then we can put more in our Facebook page or something.
Yeah, this is all the ones that I know that I used for these 2 sections, but there were way more when we get into the House of Many Stairs, because that is local history.
Yeah.
So I used Hands on Heritage, Lynn Estomin, who is a past professor over at Lycoming College.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be using some of her stuff, which actually she allowed us to use, which is exciting.
Yeah.
She's never allowed it before, as far as I know. I also used National Geographic Society, the National Park Service, and the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center.
Okay.
A lot of nationals.
Lots of nationals.
But all legit places. So with that, I want to start off with kind of like painting a background of the history of our area. Because if you're listening like Steve from out of state, you know that we've covered a couple of Native American skirmishes and like major fights in the past. But the land in this area is an absolute hot mess. Yeah. Like if there is going to be any place haunted, it's going to be in our area because we were the frontier for a very long time. And there were so many times that people's houses were burned down when they came back, or their family was stolen and put into like Native Americans, like basically into forced slavery. So there's a lot to unpack in rural Pennsylvania. There really is. But I want to offer some positivity first, which is what I did for the Knights. So first off, Pennsdale is known for its use of a special kind of bridge, and they have the oldest one currently in service. So it's called the Reading Hall Station Bridge. It was built in 1846, and it was originally designed as a railroad bridge. It most likely is the oldest all-metal truss bridge in active service in the United States, which is really cool. And you can go see it. It's still, again, it's being used. It's in gorgeous repair.
Yeah.
And for the fact it's almost 200 years old, like, that's pretty cool.
That is really incredible.
So go, Pennsylvania. That's all I'm going to say. So that's the happy. That was it.
That's it. All right. Now, time to get miserable. Strap yourselves in.
Strap yourselves in, kids. Here we go. We already mentioned on a previous episode the Native American skirmishes that happened. And so one of our previous episodes was the Plum Tree Massacre, which we had covered because of a pretty dark tale of a woman who was being abused at her house.
About, what, 10? No. Yeah, about 10 miles away from where the House of Many Stairs is.
Yeah. So we discussed the Plum Tree Massacre in a lot of detail. So if you're not sure what we're talking about, go back and listen to that episode. It's labeled the Plum Tree Massacre. Yep. I wasn't going to give it a funny name because it's a really serious topic. So Muncie itself, which is like the borough and like the major town in that area. I don't want to use the word town because technically the only town in Pennsylvania is Williamsport.
That's right.
So the village, borough, whatever of Muncie, it's part of Pennsdale. It's actually named after the Native Americans who were there before.
Yep.
So I appreciate them giving the name back to the Native Americans, but it happened a while afterward. So I'm not really sure if I'm proud.
I mean, there's all across America, there's so many towns and cities named after Native American tribes or whatever their
mascots are also.
Oh my gosh, yeah. But like even what was it, Mount McHenry, I think it was, in Alaska. They renamed it Mount Denali, which is the indigenous name for it. So, trying to right some wrongs, you know.
So we appreciate that.
Yeah.
But the Muncie Indians used to live there, and I hate using the word Indians, but my research used that term. So I do apologize.
Not McHenry, sorry. I just had to jump in there.
I appreciate that you're fixing yourself. We can all learn from that, Puckle PJ. Anyway.
They got the wrong name to a mountain that's no longer named that, you know?
Very important. But anyway, Muncie was spelled a couple of different ways, but nowadays we spell it M-U-N-C-Y. So they were forced out by all of the white frontiersmen, and they moved to what is now called Muncie, Indiana, which is M-U-N-C-I-E. But that's where they ended up kind of locating after they were forced out. So the area of Pennsdale itself was settled by four brothers, Silas, William, Benjamin, and Isaac McCarty, and we think it was around 1787. And that is close to the time when House of Many Stairs is actually built. So it's kind of cool to see that like House of Many Stairs really is like original to this entire area. And some of the people I just mentioned in that group of four brothers may have been instrumental in building the house. So just saying that. Now, the name for Pennsdale flip-flop names so many times. There was an act in January 19th of 1827 when the name was changed from Pennsboro to Muncie to fit the history. So, but at that point, Pennsboro had also been Pennsdale and everything else. So When you're looking for research for this town, Muncie and Pennsdale area, good luck. Because depending on the year, they had a different name. So it's just a pain in the butt. But one of the earliest settlements in the West Branch Valley was actually this area. And so residents were part of the most historic events in the frontier, including the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War. So a lot of bloodshed happening on all sides. And explorers recognized, though, that they had to keep fighting for it because it had such a closeness to the river and it had connections to all the Native American trails. So they couldn't give up the land because it was so important for them, for their trapping, their trading, lumber that they were doing.
Fresh water.
Yeah, later
Everything.
Distilleries. Yeah, so a lot of stuff was going on. Now, Pennsdale itself was known for its thriving lumber industry and its distilleries, which I think is hilarious, which we're talking about when we're at House of Many Stairs, because this area was, developed by Quakers.
Yeah.
They don't believe in drinking alcohol. So the fact that there was so much distillery stuff going on, it's kind of like, hold on. But there were also a lot of taverns. And at one point, the House of Many Stairs was a tavern. So kind of important to notice that.
Which is so cool.
Yeah, when we go through the history of that, and play the audio from the nights, it's really cool. The timber raftsmen moved logs down the Susquehanna River to the Chesapeake. And because they did that, they frequented the taverns. So since they were frequenting taverns, they were drinking a lot. And my research said that because of that, 1,300 gallons were produced daily just for the taverns in the area. So they had their booze. 1,300 gallons.
That's crazy.
Like, I think of a gallon of milk. And, I couldn't drink a gallon of milk a day.
Oh, I know.
It's like 1,300 of those, and it's not milk. But anyway, the West Branch Canal then was a great business thoroughfare. They had hogs, wheat, flour, lumber, leather, whiskey coming through. I'm going to use that word whiskey again. But there were 13 distilleries in the area, and their output was about 1,500 gallons of whiskey per day. So at least 200 were being shipped down, but most of it was staying local to the taverns. But anyway, there were many other locations in Pennsdale for the Underground Railroad, though. And so that's where the history then is going to branch off to that for tonight. Because House of Many Stairs, the reason it's so important for us and it's a hidden gem is it was created by the Quakers as a place to hide runaway slaves.
Yeah.
So when I was there, I discussed the different places in the area that also used, houses, people, produce, whatever, to help people get to Canada. And one of those was the Wolf Run House, and that was owned by the Quaker named William Haynes. And a fun thing about that is 3 generations of his family were actually involved in the Underground Railroad and all the activities. And not many families can say 3 generations helped. That's really cool. Now, for the House of Many Stairs, the reason why they couldn't do that is because it changed hands so often. A generation couldn't stay for the next generation and have, their children help out. But Daniel Hughes also had his second generation help. But the Wolf Run House got the distinction of having 3 different generations, which is pretty cool. But in Pennsdale, we actually drove past it. There's the Quaker Meeting House just down the road. It actually served as an assembly point for runaway slaves to continue their travels along the Genesee Trail into New York State and then to Canada. So when they got there, they would be sent to Wolf Run or to the House of Many Stairs or other hidden areas. Now, the House of Many Stairs isn't that far from the Quaker Meeting House, fun fact. But there was a fun little ghost story that goes along with the Quaker Meeting House. And I'm saying ghost story as a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing because there was a rumor that was spread throughout the area that the meeting house was haunted, and that helped dissuade people from going there to check it out and look for runaway slaves because they were afraid of this ghost or whatever. But what really happened is late one night, people heard this horrifying sound coming from the cemetery. And it was a sheep that was stuck in the fence. But the Quakers never, fixed that rumor. They didn't lie. They just never dissuaded them from believing it. So that way, people who were coming, slave catchers were coming, they would steer clear of the assembly house and the runaway slaves were saved.
So great.
Because of a sheep. Only in our area, I swear. But that's just kind of cool. So that's your fun little ghost story feel, because it wasn't actually a ghost, but ooh. I mean, how does a bleeding sheep who's stuck in a fence sound like it? Well, I guess it could sound like a shrieking goat.
Yeah, similar to a screaming goat. Yeah.
I just think of Taylor Swift, that parody where they have the goat screaming. I'm going to have that in my head all night. All right, anyway. So there was another place called the Longreach Plantation, and it was owned by Derek Updegraff, which is really cool because our dentist is on Updegraff, like Avenue or Alley, whatever.
Opposite of Down to Graph.
Yes, absolutely. But that name is very well known, and people respect it because they were well-known Quakers and they were conductors in the Underground Railroad. His uncle and his great-uncle also helped out. So runaway slaves would arrive on packet boats at docks of downtown Williamsport, Susquehanna River. Then they would be hidden at Updegraff's Exchange Hotel. And it was hard to find them, so when slave catchers came through, it was very difficult to find them in this hotel because the hidden areas were so well hidden. Now, another fun note I put in here, too, for them when I did the research is the president of Williamsport Elmira Railroad, his name was Robert Ferries. He would use his access to the actual railroad to hide runaways in the baggage compartments of trains headed north. So while he didn't, use his house, he was still hiding them whatever way he could to get them up north. But anyway, in Muncie, there was the McCarty-Wortman House on Main Street, and that was another hiding place. And that house actually takes part in the different part of the story and the history that I went over with the Knights at House of Many Stairs. Now, the sad part about the Underground Railroad is the estimates, because I like to promote history in its actuality. I don't want to whitewash or make it seem happy. While we can say that the area was really well known for the Underground Railroad and that we were really helping, it was a minority that was helping. It was the Quakers.
Yeah.
Because in that time period, a lot of people in Pennsylvania still had they believed in slavery. But the Underground Railroad itself, between the years of 1810 to 1850, it only helped save about 100,000 runaway slaves, and that's a really big estimate. So the 100,000, it's optimistic, because the really more accurate one would be to say between 25 and 50,000 people were actually saved on the Underground Railroad, so half that number. To put in context, there were 3.9 million slaves in 1860. So if you were to do the math, very few runaway slaves were actually saved by the Underground Railroad. It just, sadly.
1.3%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not very much, which is sad. So we will talk about that in a second, but I want to go back to the Native Americans, because I think discussing the big runaway and the little runaway is important, because it kind of paints a past picture to then the current picture of what was happening during the Underground Railroad. So the big runaway was the story that we told back with the Plum Tree Massacre. It was a mass evacuation of the Lycoming County area in June and July of 1778, because there were so many raids happening by Loyalist troops and the Indians that were out there. And so they also had the scorched earth policy. So once you booked it back to the fort for safety, and then you went back out to your house later, everything was gone.
It was gone, yeah.
So it was a lot of contention that was building, a lot of anger over the murders that were happening on both sides, on the burning that was happening on both sides. So that being said, the contention of all of that arose from the Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1768. So because there was a fight over that new purchase and what the land actually was, and again, that's all covered in a previous episode, Native Americans were very angry because the white frontiersmen were going further out than they should have.
Yeah, they're going beyond the boundaries of what was arranged.
Yeah. And so the bloodiest day in Lycoming County history was in June. It was June 10th of 1778, when 3 different skirmishes happened and mass bloodshed. Now, the numbers aren't humongous, like, Gettysburg, for example, but this is frontiersmen. So there aren't many people out there, and they're all dying. So there were 3 separate attacks. The first one was a party of people going out to find some stolen horses. Almost all of them die. And there was 12 of them. Almost all of them died. The second attack on that same day was men going out to retrieve some cattle. 2 of them were killed. 1 was taken prisoner. The third attack, though, is one that gets most of the story, and that's the Plum Tree Massacre, where the party of 16 goes out, 12 are killed and they're scalped. 2, one woman is still alive after being scalped, and she dies in her husband's arms once he finds her later. 2 girls were taken prisoner. 2 children saw everything happen, and they have trauma and PTSD forever.
Yeah.
It is not a good time. So that's what we're talking about, the bloody, the bloody ground, the negative energy that's out there. So all of that has happened. Now, that's Native Americans to the frontiersmen. We cannot say that the white frontiersmen were any better. because there was the Battle of Muncie Hills where in 1763, 100 plus settlers just traveled up the Susquehanna River and they just destroyed every Native American town they could find, even if they were peaceful. So that predates even the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, which predates the bloodiest day. So there's just a lot of anger and animosity of whites versus the Native Americans. Well, we're here talking about the Underground Railroad. Because of their anger towards the Native Americans, there is a lot of contention then against anyone whose skin is a different color. And it's unfortunate, but and I'm not saying there wasn't a reason to, like, there was anger on both sides. So I'm going to put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So there was the Muncie Abolition Riot of 1842. Now, this we covered in detail with the House of Many Stairs. And I just think it's important because it presents the area. So, again, people tend to think that for some reason, Pennsylvania was all about, abolitionists. We were against slavery. Mm-hmm. And that's not true.
Yeah.
At all. We had Quakers who came in and created Pennsylvania, hence the name Pennsylvania, because William Penn. So there were those who didn't believe in slavery, and they really promoted the idea of, abolition. But there was a lot of anger, and there was a lot of hatred.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of upset when abolition went through.
Yeah. Yeah, on PBS, I watched a couple, they have these micro history things about the Underground Railroad with descendants of survivors from the Underground Railroad. And one woman, she said there's a saying in her family that went back generations, and it was, the North conceals what the South reveals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's very, and she said even today, it's very telling of just, things that happen in the South blatantly happen in the North. Mm-hmm. You just don't hear about it,
Yep.
And we can definitely say that about history, too.
Yeah. And that's why I hate when you say the Civil War was just, again, about slavery. It wasn't. There was so much more for the Civil War. Yeah. And so the Muncie Abolition Riot of 1842 just kind of paints a picture of what Pennsylvania was. It was this dichotomy of the Quakers who were against slavery and not everybody else, but the vast majority. So in April of 1842, we are in Muncie. We're in the one-room schoolhouse, the only schoolhouse in the area, okay? And there is a big presentation happening because over in New Jersey, and it's kind of, spreading westward, we have all these Quakers coming in saying, we need to stop slavery. And so people in the Muncie-Pennsdale area, they invite a speaker whose name is lost to time.
ChatGPT is very, very assertive that it is a specific person.
When you ask ChatGPT why, it goes, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think
when you ask ChatGPT for sources, it gives me sources and I click on them and that person is not in the source. I do Control F and search for the person's name and they're not anywhere in in the page. I'm like, okay, that's great. But I did look up, I forget what the person's name was. It's been 2 weeks now at this point. But there were only about 4 or 5 people who actively went around and spoke. Mm-hmm. So it was only a handful of people that it could have been at this riot.
Well, and I have a couple names of different people who did walk, from... It's crazy. There's some stories of people who walked thousands of miles just to promote the idea of abolishing slavery.
Yep.
But in any case, this speaker, who will stay unnamed, is giving a presentation about abolition. Now, Enos Hawley from the area, he was an abolitionist Quaker from Muncie. He invited this unknown named person to speak. Now, he was there giving a speech in the one-room schoolhouse, but during the course of the speech, a huge riot ensued outside. And it caused the near destruction of the schoolhouse because they were throwing rocks, they were breaking all the windows. Enos and the speaker were both injured during this riot. They were able to flee the school, and while they were fleeing, they were pelted with eggs. Then the rioters chased them all the way to Hawley's house on the corner of High and Main Streets, and then they continued to assault the Hawley home for hours. Finally, at midnight, the local lawmen were able to quell the riot and arrest the rioters. It was 18 men in total. And I just think it's important to note that they were there for hours. abusing these men and these people who were, we have freedom of speech. They destroy a school. They're destroying a house over their opinions. And the lawmen don't stop it initially.
Mm-hmm.
And so that leads me to wonder why. But again, you cannot say that Pennsylvania was 100% against slavery. That would be whitewashing history. And I refuse to do that. We know that I refuse to lie.
Yeah.
So in any case, the trial then comes. The men were indicted in September and October, but only 13 of them were actually found guilty. And it was a very long deliberation process. And it's actually because of Abraham Updegraff. Gotta love the Updegraffs here.
Mm-hmm.
He was a member of the jury. He obviously was an abolitionist and a Quaker. We already mentioned he was a vital member of the Underground Railroad. The first jury vote that they held was 11-1. Only Updegraff voted against. They wanted to acquit these men. They said all 18 men did not do anything wrong. Everything's fine. But then Updegraff has a very famous quote that I love. He said, "We have been sworn to try this case according to the law and the evidence presented, and that if no contradictory evidence offered by the defendants, then we could do nothing more than to convict them." And so he's like, they did wrong, and they've given no evidence to say they didn't do it. So our job is to say that they did it.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to give that quote. But what makes this kind of really more influential is he's able to actually say that in German because our area is known for the Amish who came in, or like to say the Dutch.
Yeah, the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yep. So he says it in their native tongue. So during the second jury vote, 9 voted guilty, 3 voted for acquittal still. They took a third jury vote. Finally, they unanimously say 13 of the 18 men are guilty.
Yep.
And you think that would be great until that conviction was overturned by PA Governor David R. Porter. He pardoned them just a couple days later.
Great.
Yep. Because, and he said, this is a quote, the reason he gave it, "It is represented to me by highly respected citizens of Lycoming County that this prosecution was instituted more with a view to the accomplishment of political ends than to serve the cause of law and order. These guys destroyed the one-room schoolhouse, assaulted 2 men, and then continued to destroy the Hawley home for hours until the police finally..." I don't know what you mean about law and order, but that doesn't sound like law and order to me. Yeah. So he pardons them. So again, we got to tell Pennsylvania history the way it is. Like, we were not all for abolition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, David R. Porter was actually not so good of a guy. He was given the name Previous Pardon Porter and the Pardoning Governor. He was not a good guy.
Gee.
But to prove
sounds swell.
to prove that he was a bad guy, he actually placed all the blame on the abolitionist speaker, who was unnamed, who came. He said the speech was, quote, "notoriously offensive to the minds of those to whom they were addressed and were calculated to bring about a breach of the peace." If he hadn't spoken his mind and used his freedom of speech, this wouldn't have happened.
How dare he?
I know. It's just like, that's Pennsylvania. Now, the process of banning slavery actually began in 1780. That's why people think that Pennsylvania was like completely against slavery. The PA General Assembly actually made a law that all people who were slaves in 1780 were to remain slaves until their owners freed them. And then all children of slaves would stay slaves until they were 28 years old. So that law, like, really, thanks. They get to stay your slaves, and that's it. If you want to free them, good. Their kids will stay slaves till they're 28, and then they're free.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Good job.
Yeah, when their bodies are broken.
Yep. So this slow abolition would then last until 1847, when it was completely abolished. And that's 5 years after the big, abolitionist riot that happened in Lycoming County. So 5 years later. Now, the census of 1790 then, when the House of Many Stairs is, created, revealed that 1% of our population in Pennsylvania was slaves, which is a lot lower than places like New Jersey or New York, who had 6%. So slavery wasn't as common in the North, and it wasn't as common in Pennsylvania as it was in New York and New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And those are our, surrounding states. And New York is above Pennsylvania. But you can't say that Pennsylvania was against slavery because we had 1% and we have things like that happening in Lycoming County. So,
Yeah.
But it was more uncommon because of the Quakers. They have their testimony of equality. And of course, the PA Dutch don't allow anyone into their closed communities. They're very self-sufficient and self-reliant. So because of that, like the Amish have no need for slaves. So they never brought them in. And the Quakers are against it because of their terms of equality. Many PA persons were actually pro-slavery because they saw freed slaves as competitors for their jobs. And so when I was doing the research, there were a lot of quotes about that. And I just think it's interesting that that's a comment that you hear over and over again. But anyway, these states, according to Pennsylvania too, like Ohio, Delaware, PA, they were all really for slavery, the majority of people. And they were obviously very close to the Confederacy and the Mason-Dixon line. So it's no surprise.
Yeah.
So that is the history of the surrounding area where House of Many Stairs was built and where it was a part of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
So I think that's just really important when you go into the history of House of Many Stairs, because every day that they had a runaway slave in that house was a day that they could die to.
Yeah.
The laws against, like the Fugitive Slave Acts, those are scary things. That's all I'm going to say. Like those laws are horrifying. So then another person, because I'm going to spend all next episode on House of Many Stairs. We're going to have Alicia here. You're going to be here. We're going to be talking about that like crazy.
Oh, yes.
So I want to spend the rest of this episode talking about another guy who totally deserves accolades for all of his hard work, as do his children who helped out. And we're going to use some clips from Lynn Estomin, who actually was able to interview one of the descendants, the direct descendants of this guy. And his name is Daniel Hughes.
Yes.
Love this guy. He was born in 1804. He died in 1880. So he lived a very long life for that time period. He was a conductor, an agent, and he was a station master for the Underground Railroad, which is pretty uncommon to do all that. And he was based entirely in Loyalsock Township, which is right where all of this is taking place. So he's just a hop and a skip and a jump away from the House of Many Stairs.
Actually, currently, right now, Little League World Series is all over the news. That is the same city as Loyalsock Township, just the other side of the city.
And Freedom Road. We discussed Haunted Freedom. We had an interview with our best friend, Sabrina.
You can go. Sabrina. If you leave the Little League World Series field and like where the barracks is that all the kids sleep in and everything, and if you just stay on that road and don't turn, you will end up onto Market Street, and Market Street leads to Freedom Road.
Yep.
So like that's how close all these things are to each other.
Yeah, it's crazy.
For some perspective there.
And we all know about Little League World Series. I don't, but everyone else does.
It's all over the news, so at least here in Pennsylvania, and everyone knows Little League. Like everyone has heard of Little League baseball. See, like I heard about it, but I never was interested in baseball because I find baseball to be boring. Yeah,
I'm a terrible person for saying that, I'm sure, but
to quote Tosh.0, if you watch a no-hitter, then you're just watching two guys play catch for 9 innings.
Exactly. You want them to crack the ball.
Yeah.
It's so boring. Anyway, so Daniel Hughes, back to this cool guy. He was actually a lumber raftsman, which is really nice. And he was a giant. He was 6 feet 8 inches. Some people put him at 7 feet tall. This is the 1800s. I don't think they even had rulers. No, I'm kidding. They did, but they were using hands.
I don't know if they could count.
They used some interesting things to measure. Anything except for metric system, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of the rule in America. But he was, 6 feet 8 inches, and he weighed around 300 pounds.
Yeah, he wasn't some scrawny tall guy like Abe Lincoln. He was
very robust.
Yeah,
he had to be. He was a lumber raftsman, so he was just built. He was like a tank.
I just picture like Paul Bunyan or someone when you talk about him.
Cool beard too. But he married a woman named Anne Roch, and depending on what you're reading, her last name is spelled differently because they didn't really spell things until the Webster Dictionary came out. So they had 16 children, so lots of kids there. And there's an interesting thing about that. They're not sure what his heritage actually was because some people mark him as a Mohawk. Some say he was a Mohawk Native American chief or it came from that descendants. Regardless, he was what the time period would call, and I put this in air quotes, mulatto, which is a derogatory term now. But in the time period, that meant mixed race. So he's half black, half Native American, is what they're thinking. His wife was also a mixed race, and she was labeled a mulatto as well. She was a local African-American free woman. So she was also free too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
good to know. So that's their background. He owned a barge, and he would use that to hide runaway slaves on his return trips up the Susquehanna River, which is really cool. And then once he got them up to his area, he would hide them at his house, so like on his property. That included caves, because he had a big farming area. He had the natural, land, the natural woods of Pennsylvania, which means, mine shafts and, little small caves and mines that way. So he hid them in there. He also created these like little huts out in the middle of the woods too that no one could find. And I like to think, I compare that to like when you're going out in the woods hunting and you like build up a little trap area where you can like hide behind some bushes.
Little deer shelter thing.
That's what they were making pretty much. So his house was actually located in a hollow in the mountains of North Williamsport, which we're talking about. It's now known as Freedom Road, but it was actually previously known as N Road. I don't I don't like using that word.
I can't stand saying that word.
Yep. So I just say N-R Hollow. Obviously that name was changed, but it wasn't changed until 1936. Well after the Civil War, well after World War I. And the only reason they changed the name to Freedom Road is because it was a petition put in front of the board saying, can we please change the name?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
So, civil rights movement's happening up until the 60s, as we well know, with Martin Luther King Jr. But again, I don't want to paint Pennsylvania history with a white brush. Like, I don't want to say whitewashed history. We're all wonderful people.
History needs to be everything.
Yeah.
It needs to be the full history.
Yep. So it is what it is. But they changed it to Freedom Road, and that's where Paris Brina's story takes place. That's obviously where Daniel Hughes lived. Now, in 1793, there was a fugitive slave law that was created. And that was a goodish law compared to the second one that came later. Because that said that any slave catchers had to stop at the Mason-Dixon line. Mm-hmm. So if any runaway slave got beyond that line, they were safe. They could not be caught and taken back. However, in 1850, a second fugitive slave law was created. So in 1850, it said it allowed slave catchers to pursue any runaway slaves in any of the northern states. And this made Hughes' work, the House of Many Stairs, Wolf Run, it made all of their jobs so much more difficult because now these slave catchers could come up to their front door, go into their houses, and search.
Yeah.
And that's why the House of Many Stairs is like really cool, because it's called that because it has lots of staircases. And it was meant to just confuse the slave catchers when they came in the house. For Daniel Hughes, he was lucky because he had an entire bunch of land up in that hollow, that northern part of Williamsport. So he could hide these slaves not in his house, on his property, but somewhere distant on his property. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in these little shacks that he's kind of built out in the middle of the woods or in caves. So after the Muncie Abolition Riot of 1842, so this is 8 years before the next fugitive slave law comes in, racial tensions are super high in Lycoming County because, again, you have some Quakers who are trying to do good work. You got Daniel Hughes who's trying to do good work. And then you have those who feel like they're good to go because the governor pardoned them and they're saying that slavery is still good, abolition is stupid. So It's not a good time to be hanging out in this area. So people like Hughes then had to outmaneuver slave catchers. And so Hughes' stories that you get from Mamie Diggs, one of his direct descendants, Hughes and his sons would lead the runaway slaves in darkness on moonless nights. So that way it was harder to see them. And they wouldn't use anything. They would, because they knew the trails, unlike the slave catchers. Yeah. So they knew where to turn, where to go. Yeah,
they actually say, fun fact, that's why people act a little crazy on full moons, is because the primal part of your brain kicks in and you know that predators can see you much more clearly.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we don't act crazy on a moonless night then, because we're safe in the darkness.
I guess so.
So I like to compare like Hughes and his sons to like when you're in your own house, because even when the lights are off, I kind of know where to walk out of my bedroom to get to the bathroom, right? So they know where to go on these Native American trails up through Williamsport because it's their property. They know where they're going. But they would also stretch horsehair across the trails just to slow down those slave catchers. And they would put it like at neck height for a man on a horse. So the horses weren't hurt, but the men might be. So Mamie Diggs actually tells that really good story. So here's the story of the horsehair.
At the corner of the cemetery where Daniel is buried, there used to be 2 huge maple trees. They were even there when I was a youngster. Daniel's sons would take horsehair and string it across the road from tree to tree, man high, so that the horses would never be injured. So in the dark of night, when the slave catcher's net were coming up Freedom Road, they would be caught. Some of them was possibly decapitated, and they were never seen again, but the horses were saved.
And I think that's a good thing. The horses weren't hurt.
Can you just take a little off the top, please?
Oh. That's the thing you just did. Okay.
I sure did.
So I like the idea of the horsehair because, like, it just showcases the amount of courage it would take somebody and just the ingenuity they had.
Yeah.
To actually do that. Now, again, as I mentioned, he would hide the runaways in brush houses, but not in his house, because he knew that if they were to actually find any runaway slaves in his house, the new fugitive slave law said that he could be punished, he could be imprisoned, he could be fined, and of course, not only would he be attacked by locals, but he could also be killed because of it, especially in this area. So for him and for his sons to continue to actually help through the secondary Fugitive Slave Act law, I think we just got to like stop and say, awesome job.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a reason that Daniel Hughes is remembered and you hear more about him than you do about the house many stairs. It's because his family worked on it together, and that house, that property stays in the hands of his family for years, right?
Yeah.
But Mamie Sweeting Diggs, as I mentioned, is his great-granddaughter. So she told the horsehair story, but she also tells a story about a mother with 2 young children. The kids had whooping cough, and this woman, like,
Yeah, you hinted to the story to me, but this is my first time actually hearing these recordings. So.
Yeah. This story, like, as a mom, I want to, like, just give this woman, like, a big, like, high five, because it is crazy what this woman goes through to get her kids up north and to get her kids to Daniel Hughes' farm. And then the luck they have and that they're not caught. Because even though he didn't really use his house, there was a hidden compartment in his house to hide runaway slaves. So this is a really cool story that Mamie Diggs also tells.
Daniel lived on Freedom Road. There was a young woman, a young mother in fact, with 2 children, who wagered her way through the swamps, the underbrush, the snakes, the bobcats, to make her way to Daniel's house. Finally, she made it. When she reached there, she knocked on the door. The door was opened by Daniel, and he brought them in. But before they could do anything, another knock came on the door, and he took one of his daughters and the mother and the 2 children, and there was a closet in the kitchen. He opened the door, touched the panel. It opened. He set him on the bench, closed everything up, and returned and answered the door. By the way, there was 2 gentlemen there, 2 slave catchers. They asked him, "Did you see a woman with 2 children?" They all said no. They didn't believe him. They decided to search the 10-room house. And after the search was over with, they found nothing, and finally they left. When they were out of earshot, Daniel went to the closet. He opened the door, opened the panel, brought the mother, the 2 children, and his daughter out. And when they did, they all blessed themselves and thanked God that the children did not make a sound because both of them had whooping cough.
That's absolutely incredible and scary.
Well, not that his daughter was in there with those kids. It's like, okay. Bad things could have happened.
Yeah.
But I just like that mom like goes through so much to get those kids up north. And that's actually an unconventional story because most of the runaways were young Black men who were able to run away because women would be more apt to stay on the plantations in the South to take care of their children.
Yeah.
So it's just unconventional that she even did that. Like, just good job, Mom. Love you so much. Now, there's another story she tells that I find really cool, and it showcases a positivity in the area. There was a guy named Henry Rankin. He was shot in his leg at a riot, and he had to have his leg amputated. It was the time period. Once you were shot, that was kind of it. Now, their story is he's actually hid in a pickle barrel for safety. They are able to just hide his or bury his leg that they've chopped off before the slave catchers get there. But the entire area kind of pitches in to give him a new leg. And so I just wanted to play this one because it's so sweet. I knew that I'd be saying a lot of negative things about Pennsylvania. So this one just makes me smile.
There was a Negro named Henry Rankin. He was a slave, and there was a massacre down in Muncie. And he was shot, and his leg was smashed. And Daniel and his sons brought him on the raft back to Williamsport. And they loaded him in a wagon and took him to Daniel's home. There they had to amputate the leg. They no sooner got the leg amputated, and a knock came, and here a slave catcher was on his way to try to find him. In the meantime, Daniel had hid Mr. Rankin in a pickle barrel, and they had buried the leg just in time. He was the only slave kept on the property for 18 months. The men in the neighborhood, along with the abolitionists, all went together and bought him a wooden leg so he can continue his journey on into Canada for his freedom.
Isn't that really sweet?
That is awesome. I love that story so much.
He spends 18 months on the property because he has to heal from what he had gone through.
10-bedroom house, by the way. Do you get that?
I can afford that. I got. Yeah, but
10 rooms. I assume they mean 10-bedroom, right? And then
I would assume so. Yeah. But I mean, not surprising. He had 13 kids.
Yeah.
sorry, 16 kids. And they think probably 13 of them were his sons, at least. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, I could just say, but that was the time period where you would just kind of keep adding on to your house and just keep adding on to your house and keep adding on. So I think he was just another house. But it's really sad because that burned down, unfortunately. There was a massive fire. So the last story that I want to play from Lynn Estomin online. And again, she has allowed me to play these because I know her. She's not really given this to anybody else, which is kind of cool. It's just a fun side story about a woman named Katie Jane. She was an ex-slave and she lived in a hut, and she actually would walk up the mountain there at Williamsport every stinking night to light and say if it was safe for people to bring the runaway slaves. So I just want to play this story because, again, it's more of a positive ending to a not so happy story in general.
The Katie Jane I've traveled. She's a powerhouse. She's a mountain. She's out off of 973. And there was a shanty, and there was a woman, and her name was Katie Jane. She was a black ex-slave, and she lived in this hut, and every night she would make a trip up the mountain carrying 2 lanterns. And on that mountainside, there was bobcats, rattlesnakes, copperheads. And evidently, she was a very good person because they never bothered her. There's 3 lookouts up on top of the Katie Jane. On the one side is the Scots Mountain. The other side is Jacoby Mountain. And through the grove, it's the Blessing Mountain. And if it was safe to cross the creek, she would hold up 2 lanterns. And if it wasn't safe to cross, she would hold up 1 lantern and make her journey back down the hill to start it all over again the next night.
And so she did that literally every single night.
Yeah.
2 or 1. So good or bad. Good. That kind of showcases how there were some people in the area who really thought it was necessary to help the runaway slaves.
Yeah.
So ending on a more positive note.
Yeah.
Now,
I did find some ghost stories, too.
Oh, good. So for Daniel Hughes, though, local lore suggests that he and his family saved probably 1,000 plus slaves based on all the stories and the amount of times that. So I'm not going to say no to that. I think it's kind of cool. I hope that's
incredible.
The truth. But I know that he was saved a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, again, that's my little backdrop to the House of Many Stairs then, because there is no Daniel Hughes that lives there, but that house was obviously used during the Underground Railroad time period to save runaway slaves.
Yeah.
So what are your ghost stories that you found for me?
So nothing specific, because they're just, especially for the Williamsport area, there aren't any real specific places unless you go to, like, stories. I mean, unless you go to a specific house, like the House of Many Stairs, then they have their own stories. But I found that the typical things like station houses, such as the House of Many Stairs, has a lot of ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
Then also caves will have a lot of residual haunts.
Well, yeah, if you would go on Daniel Hughes' property, there are stories about hearing, like, crying and stuff in the caves.
That just freaks me out. Like, imagine you're just some amateur spelunker, and you go into a cave, and there's someone staring at you, like, in the cave. Like, oh my gosh, that'd be terrifying.
I am not here to take you back to the south. I'm just here to find some gold.
And guaranteed, it's probably residual haunt. It wouldn't be an intelligent haunt because they wouldn't have been there for long or anything. Just a place of high emotion because you're on the move, you're on the lam. And lastly, bridges. Bridges are a common Underground Railroad haunting.
Now, why is that?
Just, I guess, necessary places to cross the rivers and
that's true
and everything. It's just a place for, and again, I would assume they're all residual haunts. Like, I can't imagine there'd be a reason for anything intelligent to be in any of these maybe the stations.
Well, bridges make sense, plus it'd be kind of scary because once you leave the cover of the woods to go across, you're out and open,
exposed to everything.
So I could see that being just like
because we even talk about, like, to travel across Williamsport, they didn't just go through the city. They went around the city in the mountains, in the ridgeline, to avoid any prying eyes.
Yep. Wasn't easy, that's for sure.
No.
Well, but at least for Daniel Hughes, he could take them up the Susquehanna.
Yeah.
And then, use his own mechanisms to get them to his property because he obviously has wagons and whatnot. And the House of Many Stairs isn't too far from the Quaker Meeting House. But you still have to walk from that to
it's a long trek from the meeting house to Daniel Hughes's.
Yep. And my guess is he wouldn't have taken them unless necessary because he'd bring his own up. But I wonder if his kids were, on the property and he was still down south picking up more runaways, they could have taken some from the Quaker Meeting House. So again, they're exposed, Yeah. So it was really scary and, a prescient fear constantly. So I feel like that anxiety is what would kind of feed into a residual haunt. There's a lot of nervous energy there.
Sure.
So this then sets us up for what's going to be next week's episode.
Yep.
We're going to go over the history of a House of Many Stairs. I know I've hinted at it a whole bunch, but I said this is going to be a background episode. We're going to talk about, because it is a private residence. Like, as we're talking about the House of Many Stairs, please do not try to go and visit. It is not a house you can just go knock on the door and be like, I'm here for a tour. That's not how this works. We were very blessed to have the opportunity to go in because it is somene's private home.
It is literally their house.
Like, don't come to my house either. But
their daughter was hanging out with her friend in her bedroom, when we were given the tour of the place, and I felt so bad.
She's probably used to it. I'm like, okay, bye. We'll let you alone now. But when it comes to that house, we're going to talk about what it looks like, what was added on, where the Native American lookouts were. We got to see the insides of bedrooms and the original flooring. We got to see
the hidden compartment.
Oh,
so cool.
It's an amazing house with just an amazing history, and it was just an awesome experience. I'm so glad that Alicia suggested it, and I'm so glad that the Knights said yes because they did not have to at all.
Literally inviting strangers into their home. We can't be more grateful.
We're decent
for
human
everything
beings.
They've done.
And then she talks to me on Facebook, and I'm like, "Hi, it's so nice to talk to you." But we're gonna really talk about that history and what we've kind of collaborated together because the Knights have done a lot of research on their house, which again, I appreciate everything that they're doing because they want the history of House of Many Stairs to be a front runner too, along with Daniel Hughes and Wolf Run, because it deserves the recognition. It's just that it didn't have a family like the Hughes family to continue that legacy.
And most importantly, I think they want it to be accurate.
Yes.
They want it to be real, which I love. There's one little bit of nostalgic history that they want to hold on to, and I get it, and I 100% agree with it. And
here we are giving these hints that no, we're like, what?
I know. We'll talk about it all next week.
But I love how as they're even like, fixing up the house, they are fixing it up, but keeping everything they can that is original, to the point where their dining room, the wall is now exposed and you can see all the fossils from
gosh, it's so cool.
It's such a beautiful house. Yeah. I'm so jealous. But so next week we'll tell their haunting stories, because there were haunted stories before this currently owned it. And we'll tell their current stories as well. We'll have Alicia here to talk about it too, which is lots of fun. I love having our listeners on. But anything else you want to talk about before we close out for the week?
If you didn't hear the midweek mini, this is extremely important. So hopefully you didn't turn the podcast off because you noticed we were winding down. This is super important. If you listen to this show on YouTube, you will not be able to listen to any new episodes after August 26th. We will still post videos. We will still post live streams, our giveaways, things like that. That will all be on YouTube. Our old episodes will be on YouTube, but new episodes will not be on YouTube after August 26th. If you like the podcast and that's how you listen to us, make sure you get a podcast playing app, such as Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. There's one that we use called the Podcast app. So any of those things will work. Just make sure you do it if you want to keep listening to the show.
But I do want to say that we are already at 23,000 listens all time for all of our podcasts.
Yep.
And Wellhouse is at 17,000.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Don't forget October 19th. If you are in Western PA or West Virginia, that area, Southeastern Ohio, we will be in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania for a convention. Christians and the Paranormal.
And we are the keynote speakers, thanks to our super best friend, Kevin Paul.
It's free, right? To go to the convention?
As far as I know, yeah.
And it's noon to 5. So it's not like an all-day affair. It's something you go for the afternoon, evening, hang out with us. Maybe we'll go to dinner afterwards and hang out with you.
Darn right we will. So, I don't know what's in Waynesburg, but let's do it.
We'll find something.
Burger
We'll find a
King!
Woohoo! We'll all get crowns.
Yay!
But seriously, come on out. It would be so cool to have some people there who know us and everything.
Surprise
other
us.
than Kevin Paul, who I can't wait to meet.
He's so cool.
But it would be really nice for some of our listeners out west. If there are any of you out there listening who can make it, I'd love to meet you guys. All
right. Well, without further ado, thank you all for listening to the Wellhouse Exorcism. Find us on Instagram as Wellhouse Exorcism, all one word. On Twitter X as Wellhouse_Exorc. Or on Facebook under Games Overboard, because we're a subsidiary. Feel free to hop on our website as well, which is gamesoverboard.com. And please email us. We want to hear from you. But as always, think spooky thoughts. My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. Desmond Tutu.